Chapter 9. Boxer's split hoof was a long time in healing. They had started the rebuilding of the windmill the day after the victory celebrations were ended. Boxer refused to take even a day off of work, and made it a point of honor not to let it seen that he was in pain. In the evenings he would admit privately to Clover that the hoof troubled him with a great deal. Clover treated the hoof with poultices of herbs, which she prepared by chewing them, and both she and Benjamin urged Boxer to work less hard. A horse's lungs do not last forever, she said to him, but Boxer's would not listen. He had, he said, only one real ambition left, to see the windmill well under its way before he reached the age for retirement. At the beginning, when the laws of Animal Farm were first formulated, the retiring age had been fixed for horses and pigs at 12, for cows at 14, for dogs at 9, for sheep at 7, and for hens and geese at 5. Liberal old age pensions had been agreed upon. As yet, no animal had actually retired on pension, but of late the subject had been discussed more and more. Now that the small field beyond the orchard had been set aside for Barley, it was rumored that the corner of the large pasture was to be fenced off and turned into a grazing ground for superannuated animals. For a horse, it was said, the pension would be 5 pounds of corn a day, and in winter 15 pounds of hay, with a carrot or possibly an apple on public holidays. Boxer's 12th birthday was due in the late summer of the following year. Meanwhile, life was hard. The winter was as cold as the last one had been, and the food was even shorter. Once again, all rations were reduced, except those of the pigs and the dogs. A too rigid equality in rations, Squealer explains, would have been contrary to the principles of animalism. In any case, he had no difficulty in proving to the other animals that they were not in reality short of food, whatever the appearance might be. For the time being, certainly, it had been found necessary to make a readjustment of rations. Squealer always spoke of it as a readjustment, never as a reduction. But in comparison with the days of Jones, the improvement was enormous. Reading out the figures in shrill, rapid voice, he proved to them in detail that they had more oats, more hay, more turnips than they had in Jones's day, that they worked shorter hours, that their drinking water was better quality, and that they lived longer, that their larger portions of their young ones survived infancy, and they had more straw in their stalls, and suffered less from fleas. The animals believed every word of it. Truth to tell, Jones and all he stood for had almost faded out of their memories. They knew that life, nowadays, was harsh and bare, and they were often hungry and often cold. They were usually working when they were not asleep. But doubtless it had been worse in the old days. They were glad to believe so. Besides, in those days they had been slaves, and now they were free. And that made all the difference, as Squealer did not fail to point out. There were many more mouths to feed now. In the autumn, the 4 sows had been littered about simultaneously, producing 31 young pigs between them. The young pigs were piebald, and as Napoleon was the only boar on the farm, it was possible to guess at their parentage. It was announced that later, when bricks and timber had been purchased, a schoolroom would be built in the farmhouse garden. For the time being, young pigs were given their instructions by Napoleon himself in the farmhouse kitchen. They took their exercise in the garden, and were discouraged from playing with the other young animals. About this time, too, it was laid down as a rule that when a pig and any other animal met in the path, the other animal must stand aside, and also all the pigs, of whatever degree, were to have the privilege of wearing green ribbons on their tails on Sundays. The farm had been fairly successful. The farm had a fairly successful year, but it was still short of money. There were the bricks, sand, and lime for the schoolroom to be purchased, and it would be necessary to begin saving up again for the machinery of the windmill. Then there was lamp oil and candles for the house, sugar for Napoleon's own table. He forbade this to the other pigs on the grounds that it made them fat, and all the usual replacements such as tools, nails, strings, coal, wire, scrap iron, and dog biscuits. A stump of hay and part of the potato crop were sold off, and the contract for eggs was increased to 600 a week, so that year the hens barely hatched enough chicks to keep their numbers at the same level. Rations, reduced in December, were reduced again in February, and lanterns and straws were forbidden to save oil. But the pigs seemed comfortable enough, and in fact were putting on weight, if anything. One afternoon in late February, a warm, rich, appetizing scent, such as the animals had never smelt before, wafted itself across the yard from the little brew house, which had been disuse in Jones's time, and which stood beyond the kitchen. Someone said it was a smell of cooking barley. The animals sniffed the air hungrily, and wondered whether a warm mash was being prepared for their supper. But no warm mash appeared, and the following Sunday it was announced that from now onward all barley would be reserved for the pigs. The field beyond the orchard had already been sown with barley, and the news still leaked out that every pig was now receiving a ration of a pint of beer daily, with half a gallon for Napoleon himself, which he always served to him in his Crown Derby soup tureen. But there were hardships to be borne. They were partly offset by the fact that life nowadays had a greater dignity than it had before. There were no more songs, more speeches, more processions. Napoleon had commanded that once a week there should be held something called spontaneous demonstration, the object of which was to celebrate the struggles and triumphs of Animal Farm. At the appointed time, the animals would leave their work and march round the precincts of the farm in military formation, with the pigs leading, the horses, and the cows, and the sheep, and the poultry. The dogs flanked the procession, and at the head of the march, Napoleon's black cockerel. Boxer and Clover always carried between them a green banner marked with a hoof and horn, and the caption, "Long live Comrade Napoleon." Afterwards there were recitations of poems composed in Napoleon's honor, and a speech by Squealer giving particulars of the latest increase in the reduction of foodstuffs. On occasion a shot was fired from the gun. The sheep were greater devotees of spontaneous demonstration, and if anyone complained, as few animals sometimes did, when no pigs or dogs were near, they wasted time and meant a lot of standing around in the cold, the sheep were sure to silence him with a tremendous bleating of 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. But by the large, animals enjoyed these celebrations. They found it comforting to be reminded, after all, that they were truly their own masters, and that the work they did was for their own benefit. So that, with the songs, the processions, Squealer's lift of figures, the thunder of guns, the crowding of cockerels, and the fluttering of the flag, they were able to forget that their bellies were empty, at least part of the time. In April, Animal Farm was proclaimed a republic, and it became necessary to elect a president. There was only one candidate, Napoleon, who was elected unanimously. On the same day it was given out, the fresh documents had been discovered which revealed further details about Snowball's complicity with Jones. It now appeared that Snowball had not, as the animals had previously imagined, merely attempted to lose the Battle of Cowshed by means of stratagem, but had openly been fighting on Jones's side. In fact, it was he who had actually been the leader of the human forces and had charged into battle with words, "Long live humanity," on his lips. The wounds on Snowball's backs, which few of the animals still remembered to have seen, had been inflicted by Napoleon's teeth. In the middle of the summer, Moses the raven suddenly reappeared on the farm after an absence of several years. He was quite unchanged, still did no work, and talked to the same strain as ever about Sugar Candy Mountain. He would perch on a stump, flap his black wings, and talk by the hour to anyone who would listen. "Up there, comrades," he would say solemnly, pointing to the sky with his large beak. "Up there, just on the other side of that dark cloud that you can see, there it lies, Sugar Candy Mountain. That happy country where we poor animals shall rest forever from our labors." He even claimed to have been there on one of the highest flights, to have seen the everlasting fields of clover and linseed cake and lump sugar growing in the hedges. Many of the animals believed him. Their lives now, they reasoned, were hungry and laborious. Was it not right and just that a better world should exist somewhere else? A thing that was difficult to determine was the attitude of the pigs towards Moses. They all declared contemptuously that his stories about Sugar Candy Mountain were lies, and yet they allowed him to remain on the farm, not working, with an allowance of a gill of beer a day. After his hoof had healed up, Boxer worked harder than ever. Indeed, all the animals worked like slaves that year. Apart from the regular work of the farm and the rebuilding of the windmill, there was a schoolhouse for the young pigs, which was started in March. Sometimes long hours and insufficient food were hard to bear, but Boxer never faltered. In nothing he said or did was there any sign that his strength was not what it had been. It was only his appearance that was a little altered. His hide was less shiny than it had used to be, and his great haunches seemed to have shrunken. The others said, "Boxer will pick up when the spring grass comes on." But the spring came, and Boxer grew no fatter. Sometimes on the slope leading to the top of the quarry, when he braced his muscles against the weight of some vast boulder, it seemed that nothing kept him on his feet except the will of him to continue. At such times his lips were just seemed to form the words, "I will work harder." He still had no voice left. Once again Clover and Benjamin warned him to take care of his health, but Boxer paid no attention. His 12th birthday was approaching. He did not care what happened so long as good store of stone were accumulated before he went on pension. Late one evening in the summer, a sudden rumor ran around the farm that something had happened to Boxer. He had gone out alone to drag a load of stone down to the windmill. And sure enough, the rumor was true. A few minutes later, 2 pigeons came racing in with the news. "Boxer has fallen. He's lying on his side and he can't get up." About half the animals in the farm rushed out to the knoll where the windmill stood. There lay Boxer between the shafts of the cart, his head stretched out, unable even to raise his head. His eyes were glazed, his sides matted with sweat, and a thin stream of blood had trickled out of his mouth.